Mr. President.
Republican Whip.
Mr. President, I rise today to stand with the brave people of Iran. These are people who have been in a fight for their freedom. For the past 2 weeks, they have taken to the streets in 185 different cities in all 31 of the provinces in Iran. It's unlike anything the country has seen in a generation. Iranians are rejecting the poverty, the repression, and the ruin which has been brought forth by 4 decades of tyranny. Americans stand with them. I think free people everywhere are watching. From Europe and South America to right here in the United States, we bear witness to the contrast, and it's a dramatic contrast, between the Iranian people's bravery and the Iranian regime's brutality. The regime's answer to these legitimate protests, and we've seen it, it's been mass murder. Ayatollah Khamenei has unleashed his Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and they're doing tremendous damage. He has unleashed them to massacre his own citizens. Credible reports estimate that thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, are dead in Iran. This surpasses the death toll of previous crackdowns throughout the Iranian regime's history of bloodshed. Tens of thousands of protesters have been thrown into prison, we understand. The regime has shut off internet and phone access. And the regime is doing that because it's anxious to hide its crimes. It's failed. The truth has gotten out. The world is seeing it. For decades, Iran's government has been the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. The world knows it. And now it has turned that same terror onto its own people. Mr. President, I applaud President Trump's leadership on Iran. President Trump's strategy has brought Iran to this breaking point. He withdrew from a failed nuclear deal. He destroyed Iran's nuclear program. He rebuilt the sanctions the previous administration had torn down. President Trump has made a significant difference around the world and certainly in Iran. Maximum pressure has strangled the regime's revenue, and it exposed its weakness. A weak Iran is a safer America. The Ayatollah has a history of paying his henchmen, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, other terrorist groups. Iran kidnaps American citizens, holds them for ransom. We've seen this. Iranian-backed militias killed 1 in 6 American troops during the war in Iraq. Today, it continues to target our troops throughout the Middle East. Iran's allies and enablers today are in Beijing and in Moscow. They share Iran's hatred of our freedom and our people. They share its determination to undermine our strength. That's why it's important for us to stand with the people of Iran. Their co-conspirator from Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is now behind bars, thanks to a brave military action led by our commander-in-chief. What's happening in Iran today will determine the future of this entire axis of aggression that's opposed to what we do as Americans, as free people. President Trump has made it very clear where the United States stands. Those who massacre innocent citizens will be held to account. This week, President Trump announced that any country that trades with Iran will face tariffs of 25%. We must continue to take action to help the people of Iran. In recent weeks, the United States has successfully seized several tankers that were smuggling oil from Venezuela. And where were they doing? They were smuggling it in violation of international sanctions. Well, we must now do the same with Iran's vast so-called ghost fleet and stop them with the same resolve. Those vessels smuggle Iranian oil in defiance of sanctions. Cash from the oil fills the regime's war chest. It funds its murderous ways. Every dollar that we deny Iranians' government is one less bullet that they can fire at their own people. The regime in Iran today is weaker. And it is weaker than it has been at any time since the revolution of 1979. The Iranian grip on power is slipping. The world sees Iran as true evil, and we must stand with those who risk everything for freedom. That's what it means when we talk about American peace through strength. When America stands for freedom, our nation and the entire world is safer. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
is also Brooks.
The Senate Leader,
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
Mr. President, the work of the Appropriations Committee never seems to stop, and that's certainly been true over this past year. Under the leadership of Chair Collins, our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee have held hearings and markups and done the hard work of writing legislation to fund the government. They've reported 8 full-year bills from the committee, most of them with broad bipartisan support. And that puts us in a position to be able to pass 3 appropriations bills here in the Senate before the August state work period last year. Now, Mr. President, we hadn't passed a single government funding bill in this chamber before August since 2018. In 2025, we passed 3 of them. And we were able to reconcile those 3 bills with the House and get them signed into law in November. That's the way we should be passing appropriations bills, through regular order, a process that gives all senators the opportunity to make their voices and the voices of their constituents heard. Mr. President, that's a far cry from how things have too often been done around here in the past. In too many years, we've had massive omnibus bills being written behind closed doors. That's not how I wanted to operate. When I became Majority Leader, I said that appropriations would be a priority. I said that I wanted to take bills through regular order to open up the process and ensure that we were making the best use of taxpayer dollars. And we made considerable progress this past year getting back to regular order. And I hope that that progress will continue as we look ahead to the next appropriation cycle. But we have to finish this one first. Mr. President, we have a January 30 deadline to fund the remainder of the federal government. And we're on track to do that. Before we leave this week, the Senate will send another package of 3 bills to the President's desk. This package received a big bipartisan vote in the House last week. We've had a big bipartisan vote here in the Senate earlier this week, and we're on track to pass it later today. And President Trump is expected to sign it into law. Yesterday, the House passed another package of 2 bills, again with broad bipartisan support. And I want to point out that this package, like the 3-bill package we're considering in the Senate, actually spends less money than if we were to do just another continuing resolution. It cuts $10 billion, or more than 10%, from what we would expect to spend on these agencies under a continuing resolution. And that's thanks to our appropriators doing the hard work of going through the budget and making the tough budgeting decisions that all Americans are familiar with, whether they're running a business or managing their household budget. That's the result of a better process. And it's what happens when we make government funding a priority. Mr. President, appropriators are working on another package of the 4 remaining bills, which I hope will receive the same bipartisan backing that has characterized the appropriations cycle thus far. And before the end of the month, the Senate will need to process all of these funding bills and get them to the President's desk. Mr. President, appropriations doesn't always make headlines, but it is an important responsibility. So I want to thank our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee again for their diligence in crafting these bills. And I know when we finish this cycle, the next one is coming in right on its heels. And my hope is that we'll be able to build on the progress we've made this past year to get the appropriations process back to what it should be, an open process that every senator can participate in. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. President,
Democrat leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I just got back from an event at the Center for American Progress. I joined with Senator Duckworth and Senator Schatz to roll out Senate Democrats' new vision to tackle the housing crisis, lowering housing costs for every single American. We call our housing agenda Opportunity Starts at Home. Opportunity starts at home. Democrats are going to focus on costs like a laser in 2026 and beyond. We're going to lay out over the next few weeks and months detailed platforms and plans on many issues related to costs. In a few weeks, it'll be groceries. Then a few weeks later, issues like child care, then energy costs, health care, and more. We talked about these issues in depth this morning, and I will get to that in a moment. But first, I just want to respond to an outrageous thing that happened with the Trump administration yesterday, showing how much of a clueless bubble these people are in. Hold on to your seats. It's hard to believe that Donald Trump's Secretary of Agriculture said this. Oh yeah, very bold solution to the grocery costs. She said, basically, just eat less and spend less. Can you imagine the solution? Can you imagine the solution to higher grocery costs? Eat less and spend less? Now, it's hard for people to believe she said it, so let me read the quote. Quote, she said, "We've run over 1,000 simulations. It can cost around $3 a meal for a piece of chicken, a piece of broccoli, corn tortilla, and one other thing." You hear that, America? This is not what Donald Trump's golden age looks like. A piece of chicken, a piece of broccoli, a tortilla, and something else that the Secretary of Agriculture forgot. The people who run this administration are just not serious. This is an insulting way to talk to the American people, telling them, just get by with less and stop complaining about affordability. The American people have had enough of this. So, as I just said, Democrats every day, every week, every month this year are going to put costs front and center in our agenda. This spring, over the next few months, and throughout 2026, Democrats will talk about precisely how a Democratic majority will lower costs for everyday Americans. We're going to go issue by issue, spending weeks at a time, rolling out a plan to lower grocery costs. Then a few weeks later, we'll unveil a vision for electricity and energy costs. We'll roll out a plan to help people afford child care and health care. Lower costs are going to be the North Star now and throughout all of 2026. And when it comes to costs, it's important to begin with housing, because it quite literally is the closest to home for most people. For millions of Americans, owning a home is the most important part of the American dream. Young families, when they own a home, know they're building equity, know they're building a future, know they may have something to give to their kids. But as we all know, over the past few decades, the American dream of finding a home has become more of a mirage. The median price of a home is up 55% since COVID, 55%. Rent is up by a third. Listen to this horrifying statistic. This should shake every legislator in their boots, because it's so awful and we have to work to change it. The average first-time home buyer is now 40 years old. That's a record high. And again, what's Donald Trump done about all this? Well, his tariffs have raised housing construction costs by $17,000 per home. He's launching a criminal investigation against the chair of the Federal Reserve. And when there's chaos and politicization at the Fed, interest rates are more likely to go higher and stay higher, because lending institutions, when they're not sure of the future, keep rates high to avoid any sudden downside. Then Donald Trump, of all things, proposed 50-year mortgages, an idea so inane and unserious it was ridiculed by the right, left, and center right after he issued it. Ironically, the only decent idea Donald Trump has floated recently on housing is one he stole from Democrats, calling for an end to institutional investors gobbling up homes and crowding out individual families. Democrats tried to get it done last year. Every Democrat voted for it, but the Republicans in Congress voted against it, and we didn't get it passed. The American people have had enough. What they want isn't rocket scientists. They simply want lower costs. They want opportunity. And Democrats believe that when it comes to creating opportunity, opportunity must start at home. So that is what I am calling our housing agenda. Opportunity starts at home. A Democratic majority will tackle the housing affordability crisis by working to reduce rent, boost home ownership, stop predatory corporations, supercharge construction, and provide housing security for all Americans. We spoke about these proposals and other things earlier this morning, like passing the Road to Housing Act, which Senator Warren put together with great mastery. And it passed the Senate by unanimous consent, unanimously. In her bill are many things that Senate Democrats have fought for, many bills that other members have introduced. Democrats also want to expand down payment assistance. We want to encourage local zoning reform by providing new incentives and disincentives, carrots and sticks, to localities to reform outdated rules which stand in the way of building housing. We want to stop institutional investors from gobbling up entire neighborhoods for profit. We want to empower HUD to invoke the Defense Production Act, something Tammy Duckworth has emphasized, guaranteeing the purchase of housing materials in short supply, and scaling production of modular and manufactured housing. And we want to create an ARPA home, to bring down housing costs. Just as DARPA was able to lower defense costs, we need an ARPA for housing. It's a national crisis just as important as defense. So let's get an ARPA for housing. And this isn't just talk. Democrats have delivered on housing relief when we had the majority. When I was majority leader, we delivered the largest rental relief package ever, and we expanded rental assistance and emergency housing vouchers. We saved millions from eviction in the depths of the COVID crisis. Now, we need expanded rental relief to help during the housing crisis faced by so many Americans. It's not COVID. It's not happening all at once in every place, but it's happening in so many places throughout America. We need the same kind of large rental relief package. In the weeks and months to come, the American people will also hear from Democrats on other areas where we're fighting to lower costs. As I mentioned, food costs, energy costs, groceries, health care, child care, and so many other things Americans pay for every day. Democrats are ready to get to work. And as I said, costs, the high cost of living, the affordability crisis, will be our focus throughout 2026, because that's what the American people are demanding. And we will show how the Trump administration and Republicans have made costs even worse, and what Democrats will do when we get power to reduce those costs in a very significant way that will affect every single American. Now on Verizon, the Verizon outage. Well, yesterday, Mr. President, more than 100,000 Verizon users experienced outages and disruptions to their cell service for roughly 10 hours. Obviously, this caused real confusion and disruption for many Americans relying on service for work, emergencies, and other things. It's encouraging that Verizon has said it will give account credits to customers affected by the outage. But this raises a very serious point. At a time of high costs, consumers must always be automatically compensated for service disruptions fully and completely. Last month, I led Senate Democrats in urging Chairman Carr of the FCC to ensure that when outages happen, customers are automatically compensated. Full compensation to customers for service disruption should be mandated, not just a courtesy, not just a suggestion, not just when the company decides to do it, it's okay, and when they decide not to do it, it's okay too, because that's wrong. And again, at a time when Americans want lower costs, automatic refunds when disruptions occur should be the norm for all telecommunication companies, and the FCC has a responsibility to require just that. Americans already facing high costs shouldn't be the ones paying the price for service disruptions, and we got to get the FCC must ensure that that occurs. Yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
Senator from Florida.
I ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 5 minutes prior to the scheduled roll call vote.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to cloture on calendar number 299 HR 6938.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I am honored to rise to the floor today to recognize some of Florida's, the Sunshine State's very best. As you know, last week we celebrated Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, and I wanted to recognize two great officers from the Tampa Bay area, which is where I, as one of the newest United States Senator, hail from. Last month, Tampa Police Department officers Jason Sikowski and Caleb Gerard saved an 86-year-old man who was found dangling off his roof. The senior had gotten to the roof to clear foliage, lost his balance, and had inched his way with no success of trying to climb back up to the edge of the roof. And the officers, when they found him, he was already dangling and was almost falling off the roof. And so you can imagine the quick response from Tampa police officers, Sikorsky and Girard, along with fire rescue who showed up. They acted timely, without hesitation, and they were able to save this Florida man from falling. And it was obvious from the situation that they found, had they not shown up, had they delayed in any way, had they not responded swiftly and acted quickly, that Floridian would have fallen 30 feet to the ground, where no doubt this story would have ended with a very tragic conclusion. And so I am very proud today to rise to recognize Officer Sikorsky and Officer Girard on the Senate floor as some of Florida's finest and present them with our Florida's Finest Award. Certainly as Attorney General of Florida, before I came to the Senate a year ago, I had always recognized law enforcement for their courage, for dedicating their professional lives to enforce the people's law. Certainly without that brave commitment by them, our society would not function as we know it. And it's been important to me to honor the extraordinary work of those selfless officers that protect Floridians. Our Florida's Finest Award honors those Floridians and law enforcement officers who demonstrate selfless courage, that go above and beyond to save lives. I'm so thankful that these Tampa police officers saved this man's life and for all they do every day to keep the Tampa community safe. So congratulations to Officers Sikorsky and Girard for helping us make Florida stronger and safer. I'm so honored to recognize them today on the Senate floor, and I will end by saying each and every one of our law enforcement officers are essential to upholding the rule of law, the people's law. Without them showing up day after day, faithfully executing their duties without obstruction or threats or attacks, certainly government and the people's government could not function as the way it is intended to. And so I will keep standing up for the men and women of law enforcement, every law enforcement officer, because we know that they are essential not only for a stronger and safer Florida, but for a stronger and safer United States of America. Mr. President, thank you so much, and I yield back.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on calendar number 299, H.R. 6938, an act making consolidated appropriations and so forth and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on H.R. 6938, an act making consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes shall be brought to a close. The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Betterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Arono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Baldwin, Cantwell, Collins, Curtis, Duckworth, Ernst, Heinrich, Kane, Klobuchar, Lummis, Marshall, Moody, Mullen, Murray, Ricketts, Rosen, Slotkin, Young. Senators voting in the negative: Lee, Paul. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Ossoff, aye. Mr. Lujan, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Padilla, no. Ms. Blunt Rochester, aye. Mrs. Hyde Smith, aye. Mr. Warnock, aye. Mr. Markey, Mr. Markey, no. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Schatz, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Ms. Hassan, aye. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Rounds, aye. Ms. Brooks, aye. Mr. Kim, no. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Gallego. Mr. Gallego, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Daines. Mr. Daines, aye. Mrs. Brett. Mrs. Brett, aye. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Murphy, no. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, aye. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Cassidy, aye. That's Mr. Scott of Florida, no. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Booker, no. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, aye. Mr. Johnson, no. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Moreno, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. King, aye. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham. Aye. Mr. Budd. Mr. Budd. Aye. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Hawley. Aye. Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith. Aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner. Aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Aye. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch. Aye. Ms. Markowski. Ms. Markowski. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune. Aye. Mr. Justice. Mr. Justice. Aye. Mr. Sheehy. Mr. Sheehy. Aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven. Aye. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Mr. Reed, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye.
The yeas are 85, the nays are 14. The 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn, having voted in the affirmative, the motion is agreed to. Cloture having been invoked, the motion to commit and the amendments pending thereto fall.
have 4 requests for committees to today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Senator from Illinois is recognized.
are we at a quorum call?
No, we're not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm trying to remember what year it was. It could have been 15 years ago in the Senate when I walked into a hearing chaired by Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I didn't know what the topic of the hearing was, but as a member of the committee, I was curious, so I sat down and listened. And I learned about something that I really wasn't aware of. Testifying were retailers from across the United States talking about something called the swipe fee, the interchange fee. I didn't know what that was. Turns out it is the fee that is paid to the banks that issue credit cards when you engage in a transaction. It's not identified to the ordinary consumer, but the retailer who's using the credit card certainly knows quite a bit about it. It's the fee that he is charged, he, the retailer, is charged for the use of the bank's credit cards. They were complaining, the retailers were, that the terms of the agreement, the interchange fee between Visa and MasterCard, which of course dominate the credit card world, were so opaque that they couldn't even get a copy of the actual contract between Visa, MasterCard, and this retailer sitting at the table. They had a stack of papers in front of them, which was part of the contract and agreement for the interchange fee, but not the complete agreement. They were frustrated because they had no control whatsoever in terms of what Visa and MasterCard were going to charge. I took an interest in it and asked Chairman Specter at the time, is the Senate Judiciary Committee going to do something? He said, of course. The honest answer was no. We had a hearing and that was the end of it. But I took an interest in the issue and decided to offer a study to see what the impact was on small businesses and retailers of these interchange fees and swipe fees charged by the banks that issued Visa and MasterCard. The industry had no interest in any study on any aspect of it and made it clear to me they were going to oppose every effort I had to try to get to understand this issue better by a credible study. I was frustrated by this and decided to make an offer of a change in the law when it came to debit cards. Debit cards are different than credit cards because they're virtually a checking account. You can only charge as much as you have on balance to pay. And the question of credit is not as paramount as it is with the credit cards. So I came to the floor and offered, with Dodd-Frank, the banking reform, an amendment on debit cards, swipe fees, and interchange fees. Just to show you what a different time it was in the United States Senate, this was a bill that was being offered by Senator Dodd in the Senate and a Republican senator as well on a bipartisan basis. I offered this amendment on the floor and got into the queue. I was about the 25th amendment that was considered, and it wasn't approved by the Banking Committee. I was just offering this on the floor. What I was trying to establish was the actual fee that was being charged for debit cards. As I said, I was about the 25th amendment to be offered. It turned out that there were so many controversial amendments in Dodd-Frank that I didn't rise to the top as the most controversial. And so the issue was called, and at the last minute, the chairman of the committee, Senator Dodd, said, and of course that will require 60 votes. His belief was that if he required 60 votes, the Durbin Amendment would go away, would be defeated. Turned out he was wrong. The retailers of America came together in a way they'd never come together before to raise questions about debit cards and the fees that were being charged to them. And the amendment passed with more than 60 votes, to the surprise of this sponsor, as well as the other members of the Senate. And as luck would have it, the House of Representatives decided, Barney Frank in particular, that this issue showed enough support in the Senate not to be part of any meaningful negotiations in conference. and the so-called Durbin Amendment went through. Since then, there have been several efforts on the floor of the Senate over the years to remove the Durbin Amendment on debit cards, where the fee was established with the cooperation of the Federal Reserve, and they have failed. So we have debit card world semi-regulated or somewhat regulated, not so much on the credit card side. Roger Marshall is a colleague of mine, Republican colleague in the Senate today from Kansas. He and I and Peter Welch of Vermont have co-sponsored legislation to extend the coverage of this issue to credit cards. And Senator Marshall and I agreed that whichever of us had the majority party at the time would be the lead sponsor. So it's the Marshall-Durbin-Welch bill today that is considered when we discuss credit cards. I give this lengthy introduction to show you that there's a deep history on this issue, and it continues to this day. And it has particular relevance at this moment for several reasons. Let me explain. Data released this week by the Bureau of Labor Statistics confirms what many in the chamber and we all know from our daily lives. Americans feel every day prices are just too high. Consumer prices, from rent to groceries to utilities and more, are up nearly 3% compared to last year. Affordability is real. It is a concern that supersedes virtually every other political concern with basic American families. And while costs continue to go up and everyday Americans are struggling, big banks are rolling in cash with profit margins around 30%. That's right. Big banks have profit margins in this economy of over 30%. Why are banks making so much money? It's because they profit off of something called a swipe fee, an interchange fee. Every time you use your credit card, Visa or MasterCard, they charge the merchant what is essentially a service fee. The merchant pays a fee of 2 to 3% on each transaction, meaning if you spend $100, the merchant gets $97 or $98. While Visa and MasterCard keep some of the $2 or $3 for themselves, most is pocketed by the big banks that issue the cards. A few bucks here, a few bucks there, and you got yourself a pretty good haul if you're a big bank. How good? In 2024, last year, the year before last, Visa and MasterCard and their big bank partners raked in more than $111 billion in credit card swipe fees. These swipe fees are crushing small businesses and their customers through higher prices. If you don't believe me, listen to what a constituent of mine in Chicago wrote. Rick is his name. He owns a gas station. He pays $50,000 to $60,000 a year in swipe fees. He says, and I quote, "These fees have an impact on pricing in the store." Small business owners like Rick have little recourse. Visa and MasterCard have a near virtual grasp on the credit card network market, controlling about 85% of it. That's right, Visa and MasterCard control 85% of the credit card market. Give you an example of some other businesses that wrote to me in relation to this issue. Credit processing fees are crushing businesses, taking up to 4% for credit card sales. Currently, this individual who wrote to me said 88% of my sales are by credit card. It has become literally the coin of the realm. This individual, Laura, says she owns a coffee shop. My per-ticket amounts are low, roughly $5. Yet each transaction can take up to 25 cents in a swipe fee to the credit cards. We need competition in the credit card marketplace, she writes, and options to choose from. Just like small businesses have to compete for customers, credit card companies should have to compete for our business. Laura has a coffee and tea business, as you might guess, in Elmhurst, Illinois. Why are banks making so much money? The swipe fees are virtually unregulated. We'd like to change that. When combined with another source of information from Cesar, Illinois, which is in downstate southern Illinois, Greg Kelly writes me, when combined with basic merchant processing fees and set monthly access fees, credit card fees can add up to nearly 5% of total transactions. Greg writes, this is insane. This prevents hiring and hinders business growth, as well as being able to compete. Credit card reform is needed now. Small business owners like Rick have little recourse. Visa and MasterCard have a virtual death grasp on the credit card network market, controlling about 85% of it. Because of this, Visa and MasterCard are free to set fee rates on credit cards wherever they like. For the retailers, take it or leave it. This allows them to tell small business owners like Rick that they're going to set the standard. He has no negotiating power. There's no competition, unless the Marshall-Durbin-Welsh bill passes. This is not how our system and our economy are supposed to work. It's time we bring back real competition to the credit card industry, the kind that encourages growth and brings about lower prices. This bipartisan bill that I've described to you, the Credit Card Competition Act, was endorsed by President Trump this week. It was kind of a pleasant surprise. I didn't know it was coming. He was unequivocal in supporting it. It would address the outrageous swipe fees that are being charged to retailers. Talk about a hidden cost of business. Every time you use your credit card, if it's for a transaction, for a meal at a restaurant, for a contribution to a charity, the swipe fee is being taken out of it, 5% and more. My bill would require the largest 30 or so banks, only the largest banks, to enable at least 2 credit card networks to be used on credit cards they issue, with at least one being outside the Visa MasterCard duopoly. That would create real competition. The banking industry hates the Marshall-Durbin-Welch Amendment like the devil hates holy water. To them, any kind of regulation is unacceptable. By injecting competition in the credit card market, this bill would help bring down swipe fees that small businesses pay and that ultimately get passed on to America's working families in the form of higher prices. Opponents of my bill have falsely claimed, that such provisions would squeeze Visa, MasterCard, and the big banks and force them to scale back reward programs. I learned something recently in the lobbying on this bill. The major airlines all oppose this bill that would limit the swipe fees and the interchange fees. And I was curious as to why the airlines would be so interested in it. It turns out for most of the major airlines, they make more money off their credit cards that they issue than they do off air operations. That's right, more money off the little square of plastic than they do on the actual airplane passengers. So when I go into Reagan National Airport, I'm not surprised that they have banners flashing, stop the Durbin Amendment, stop anything that might affect your frequent flyer plan. You often wonder in an airplane, I pay attention to this and most people don't, when do you get the announcements from the flight attendants about their credit cards? As soon as you reach the point they completed all their safety announcements and told you to buckle up and shut up because we're about to take off, then they announce their credit card program and want you to sign up for it. That's the reality of it. Watch next time you get on an airplane when they do this. Those poor flight attendants are peddling these applications up and down the aisles, trying to get people to sign up for credit cards. The fact of the matter is Visa, MasterCard, and their card issuing banks have plenty of room for reform. In 2024, banks netted about $378 billion in revenue from debit and credit cards, but they paid only $47 billion in rewards. Of course, I value frequent flyer miles like everyone else, but the fact is the program will not even be touched. I'm no mathematician, but I think the big banks have plenty of revenue left to continue offering rewards without hurting their bottom lines. And for those of you who are worried about your airline miles or cash back, an analysis by payments consulting firm CMSPI found that rewards would be reduced by less than 0.1% at most because of the Credit Card Competition Act. So they're crying wolf. This bill has the support of conservative Republican senator from Kansas, Senator Marshall, a liberal Democrat, Peter Welsh, from Vermont, and myself, of course. I urge my Senate colleagues, let's come together and get this done on behalf of consumers and small businesses. You want to do something that really makes a difference to the bottom line debt of families, address the outrageous interest rates being charged on credit cards, and address the swipe fee that's being charged on retailers that is fed into the inflationary aspects of this economy. This is the time to do it if we're going to meaningfully address the real expenses that families face. I urge my colleagues to take a look at this measure, this bipartisan measure, common sense measure that will make a difference on the families that we represent. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that Barbara Bernal Monroy be given floor privileges for the remainder of the Congress.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I rise today to join Senator Kelly and many of our colleagues who spoke just yesterday afternoon to highlight the enduring damage done to our democracy nearly 16 years ago, when a single decision handed down by the Supreme Court of the United States gave corporations and billionaires in our country unlimited spending power to influence our elections. The case is referred to as Citizens United. And the ruling didn't just change campaign finance law, it fundamentally altered our democracy. It truly was a turning point. It was a moment where the voices of everyday Americans began to be drowned out every election cycle by a small and powerful few, armed with unlimited money and unprecedented access. And we see the consequences of it to this day. Just one example, this may shock you, a billionaire like Elon Musk, who was not shy nor discreet about spending nearly $300 million to support President Trump's candidacy in 2024. Others were similarly involved, but he was not shy about it. And so it wasn't a surprise, it was not a coincidence when early in the Trump administration, he was basically given the keys to the federal government and allowed to run roughshod through federal departments and agencies and budgets through this experiment called DOGE. Just one of many, many examples of how those with a lot of money, corporations and individuals, can now both influence elections and the election outcomes and then take folks in the offices that were their preference to reap benefits, all while this administration continues to ignore the needs of America's working families who are facing increasing electric bills, grocery bills, certainly health insurance costs, among so much more. Senator Kelly and others spoke to this eloquently yesterday afternoon. What I wanted to do is add to that conversation and add to the picture of what's happening with campaign finance in America at this moment. The American people are increasingly concerned with the influence of money in politics because they also see fewer efforts and resources being committed to enforcing what's left of campaign finance oversight and accountability. Under this administration, what's left of campaign finance systems and accountability is also under further attack. President Trump has completely sidelined our country's top campaign finance watchdog, the Federal Election Commission. Just last year, President Trump fired one of the commissioners, Ellen Weintraub, without cause or without justification. It was clear retaliation at her attempts to hold him accountable during his first term as president. Now, removing an FEC commissioner like this was not only unlawful and without precedent, but it was soon followed by 3 Republican members of the commission also leaving voluntarily to pursue other jobs. Now, under normal circumstances, when there's a vacancy or vacancies to the FEC, an administration would consult with the Senate on nominations to fill these vacancies quickly and on a bipartisan basis. But not with this administration. Now, there are just 2 commissioners that remain, and the agency has lacked a quorum for 260 days and counting, with no end in sight. It's not an oversight. It's clearly intentional by the White House. President Trump is purposefully leaving these vacancies open, refusing to send bipartisan nominees to the Senate for consideration and confirmation. And the reason it's so critical, the reason it's so urgent is we are quickly entering the midterm election season. So imagine that, a midterm election, a very consequential midterm election that will undoubtedly be met with unlimited spending, not just by candidates, but through super PACs and other dark forces, without the tools of campaign finance oversight, regulation, and accountability. That should concern all of us as it concerns the American people. So, colleagues, we have the power to fix this. We can legislatively fix the wrongs of the Citizens United case by the Supreme Court, and we must immediately restore quorum to the FEC so they can do their critical and important job in the months ahead. So I'll continue to be a leading voice in this fight and look forward to working with all of you, both sides of the aisle, to do what's right. Now, Mr. President, I'd also like to speak and have it noted separately in the record that I rise today.
Without objection.
That I rise today with the bittersweet task of saying goodbye and paying tribute to my communications director, Tess Oswald. Tess has done such outstanding work, not just for me, but on behalf of the people of California. She's been alongside me since my first days here in the Senate 5 years ago. And I know I speak for our entire team when I say that we've been honored with the privilege of working alongside her and that we're going to miss her. She's a proud daughter of California and of parents who served the public as federal prosecutors. So public service is in her blood. She's brought remarkable drive and passion to every facet of her work. And she has both led the communications team and mentored so many of the communications team members with her heart and her presence of mind. Not surprising to me, given her tremendous past experience, both serving multiple members of Congress, but also working on political campaigns, including a presidential campaign many years ago. And of her, the members that she's worked for in the past, it includes my now colleague, Senator Adam Schiff, also representing California. Can go on and on about her resume, on and on about her contributions on different issues and different engagements with the people of California, speaking engagements, speeches, etc. But of the many, many moments that were so impactful, I think the best example of her insights and value of her advice was in the aftermath of what has become known as an infamous incident at a Department of Homeland Security press conference that I attended last year in Los Angeles. The incident, the visuals of that incident that shook so many across California and across the country, Tess, in her wisdom, took these worst of circumstances and both properly and successfully pivoted the attention and the message to where it rightfully belonged, highlighting the cruelty of this administration and now how it was terrorizing communities throughout the Los Angeles region and soon elsewhere around the country, as this administration has been targeting indiscriminately and in increasingly cruel fashion immigrants, not just the worst of the worst, dangerous, violent criminals that the administration likes to talk about so often, but what we have seen in reality is so many of the immigrants that have been arrested, detained, and even many deported without due process. Maybe undocumented, otherwise hardworking people contributing to our country, they're the vast majority of the victims of this administration's mass deportation efforts. Tess has helped correct that narrative and emphasize, highlight that narrative as part of her public service. On a personal note, look, as a husband and as a father myself, I know and I share very frequently that public service is not without personal sacrifice. And Tessa's family has seen no different. I've seen her and some of her personal milestones over the last few years, from engagement to marriage to becoming a mother. And so I thank Quinn, her daughter, Justin, her husband, and her entire family for sharing Tess with us over these last 4 years, and certainly throughout her career. And Quinn may not appreciate it today, but I hope she one day learns to appreciate not just the value of that sacrifice, but the importance of Tess's work to me, to our office, to the people of California, and to the nation. So Tess and your entire family, just want to say we thank you. We appreciate everything that you've done for me, for Angela, for our office, for California, and for our nation. And it is with a heavy heart that we both say thank you and send you off into your next chapter, knowing that you won't be that far away. We'll have to call you back into action from time to time as life needs it. But we just so truly, truly appreciate everything that you've done and how you've done it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since the beginning of this year, there's been a lot of conversation, both here in Washington and around the country, about the future of American involvement in Venezuela and how that relates to the War Powers Act. So as we head into recess, my colleagues head back to their respective states and to other locales, I just wanted to take a minute and update my constituents on how this U.S. Senator is approaching this situation. First, I want to reiterate that I support President Trump's decision to bring Nicolas Maduro to justice for his many crimes. I know I speak for countless Hoosiers in expressing my gratitude that after years of oppression, the Venezuelan people now have a new hope. In fact, I've taken meetings in recent days with diplomats, national security luminaries, business people, expats, and others, and those meetings have reinforced the reality for me that right now we have an opportunity for brighter days ahead in Venezuela. And I know the administration is working with multiple stakeholders to affect that sort of positive change that we're all hoping for. And I, of course, also want to commend the bravery, the professionalism of the U.S. service personnel who carried out the successful law enforcement mission in Venezuela earlier this month. Highly impressive, highly sophisticated. I'm awestruck by the mission, all that it accomplished, and I thank the men who are part of that. Now, while I applaud and stand with the President and his team on the law enforcement action taken in Venezuela to remove Nicolas Maduro, that law enforcement mission is now complete. I just want to clarify that for many of my constituents. I've also expressed concerns about the possibility of American military involvement in Venezuela as we move forward. The President and members of his national security team have openly stated that the United States now runs Venezuela. And because we can't predict the future, no one can guarantee with certainty that an American military presence won't be required to stabilize the country. So I, along with what I believe to be the majority of Hoosiers, am not prepared to commit American troops to that mission. I strongly believe that any such commitment of U.S. forces in Venezuela must be subject to debate and authorization in Congress, and that is what animated so much of my activity in recent days and weeks. Now, that belief is not a new one to this situation or this president. In fact, for over a decade and under multiple presidents, I have pushed for Congress to fulfill its role defined in the Constitution on matters involving the use of military force. Since U.S. involvement in Venezuela began last year, I've pushed for briefings and other forms of congressional engagement. Just last week, because of those concerns, I ultimately voted to advance a war powers resolution to make my concerns crystal clear to the administration and to my colleagues. The reality, though, is this. Even if the Senate had adopted that resolution, had it not been derailed through a procedural vote, it likely would have died in the House of Representatives, very likely, or at a minimum been vetoed by the President of the United States. That much was clear. Given that stark, incontrovertible, unavoidable reality, I've had numerous conversations with senior national security officials over the past week since the first vote took place. And in those conversations, some in person, some by phone, I received assurances that there are, number one, no longer any American troops in Venezuela. I've also received a commitment that if President Trump were to determine American forces were needed in any major military operations in Venezuela, the administration would come to Congress in advance to ask for a formal authorization on the use of military force. And lastly, Secretary Rubio has agreed to my request to appear before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to provide a public update on Venezuela immediately after the recess, facilitating the very type of public debate and, if necessary, someday authorization around these matters. Hopefully working the muscle memory of this institution and its various committees on issues of war powers so that they might be more inclined to operate those prerogatives, to exercise those prerogatives in the future. For those like me who want Congress to perform its long-standing role in these issues, the commitments I've secured are major commitments that will help keep Congress better informed, help ensure we make better decisions, and ensure in this situation that any future commitment of U.S. forces in Venezuela is subject to public debate and authorization here in this body. So let me just end by saying that President Trump campaigned against forever wars. Millions of people strongly supported him in that position. I strongly support him in that position, still today. And I believe that a drawn-out campaign in Venezuela involving the American military, even if unintended, would be the opposite of President Trump's goal of ending foreign entanglements. But I also make that statement with humility, understanding that world events are fluid, the world is complicated, circumstances can change. And what all of us in this body should want is the opportunity to perform oversight and provide input on these critical foreign policy issues on behalf of those we represent. If we must make a decision, a very difficult decision, at some point in the future, our constituents should be able to hold us accountable for those decisions. Regardless of who serves as president or which party controls the White House, Congress must get back to carefully fulfilling its constitutional responsibilities. And I am pleased that we have a path forward toward that goal now. And I look forward to the next steps in the weeks ahead. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Washington is recognized.
Mr. President, I come to the floor this afternoon to congratulate the appropriation colleagues who have got us to this point of voting today on final passage of three important appropriations bills. I want to congratulate specifically Senator Collins and Senator Murray from my home state of Washington. They've done an admirable job, and I certainly want to compliment Senator Murray for her hard work and attention on policies that affect our state, particularly in the areas of water. But we're here today because we want to say to our fellow colleagues, these are three important bills to preserving science and the role that science plays in moving our nation forward. Last May, I hosted an online roundtable with Senator Van Hollen, a lead appropriator, and I thank him and the rest of the appropriators on the committee, both on the Democrat and Republican side, because we wanted to speak out about how federal agencies and scientists, including some from my state, were here to decry the impacts that we would see if the Trump administration was successful at cutting the National Science Foundation, particularly cutting NOAA, cutting NASA. These participants made it clear that industry depends on strong partnerships with the government to conduct basic and applied science, and that they can't do it on their own. These important people also were convened in a group in June, meteorologists from around the country, to specifically hone in on how cuts to the NOAA budget would endanger Americans on issues like peak hurricane and wildfire season. And we called on the administration to restore the agencies to their full capacity. So very happy that these three bills, I think, represent a win for science, as was recently reported in the New York Times. But it also was specifically important for the science NOAA research budget, $634 million that NOAA can continue to improve weather forecasting and development tools that actually save lives and save money. I know my colleagues from all over the country are plagued by weather events. It could be a hurricane, it could be a tornado, it could be a flood. We obviously were just impacted in the Pacific Northwest, but we need the tools. We need new hurricane hunters, we need new radar systems, we need the meteorologists, we need the people on the ground, like happened in Texas, so that you can take weather information about how warmer events are creating more precipitation, and that precipitation could lead to record flooding. We need the whole system to work with the emergency responders, and we need the ability to get people out of harm's way. These bills also maintain NOAA's fishery funding and increase investment in salmon hatcheries and the Columbia River, and it protects the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund from being zeroed out. I see my colleague from Oregon here. I know as an appropriator, he knows how well and important the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund is, just as my colleagues from Alaska, Oregon, California, Idaho, and Montana know. So the whole region knows how important these funds are. So Congress has rejected administration's attempts in the NOAA budget to cut $1.7 billion out of the NOAA budget. It literally wanted to slash the entire R&D arm of NOAA and slash the NOAA fisheries by 29%. And these three bills today obviously reject that. We're also sending a strong message that we believe in our scientists in other agencies. And I'll get to NOAA in a minute, but just on this continued improvement of sensors and instruments, this bill invests in NOAA's critical research in life-saving agencies. During the last month of record flooding in my state, over 100,000 people were forced to evacuate their homes. And now 73 landslides have been reported. So these important reminders, like weather events, are why we sent a 5-point plan to the president saying funding for research, technology tools, buoys, and other information are important to modernizing the nation's weather forecasting capabilities. In addition, as I mentioned, other agencies, the president thought we should make massive cuts. Thank God our bipartisan efforts by appropriators and our colleagues represented by the earlier votes on these bills show that we don't agree with that. We will double the request for funding for the National Science Foundation, and we support the NSS fundamental applied research investment in universities across our nation. This is important work in all sorts of medical devices, insulin pumps, pacemakers, important things for healthcare and for manufacturing competitiveness. We also, with this bill, send a strong message that we stand by our NASA agency. We fund, this legislation funds the NASA mission area and avoids jeopardizing our exploration of the moon and solar system. We're not going to put aviation safety at risk or leadership in aerospace technology, such as advanced composites. It restores NASA's budget from under $19 billion as proposed by the Trump administration to $24 billion to ensure that we can return to the moon before China and sustain America's presence there. So very happy that all of these things are really important investments, generational investments in science program, rejecting the cuts by the administration and instead fueling the innovation economy that is so important for America's competitiveness. So while I'm very happy, Mr. President, to celebrate these three bills, we also have more work to do. This week, it is clear that the economic numbers point to the fact that we are not lowering costs in America. The Bureau of Labor Statistics said this week that consumer prices are up 2.7% higher than a year ago. It has been a full year since this administration has been set in motion with its economic policies, and now we know the prices of groceries are up 2.4%, the price of shelter is up 3.2%, the price of medical services is up 3.5%, the price of electricity is up 6.7%, and the price of natural gas is up 10.8%. So the reality is that tariffs are having an impact. They're adding to the sticker shock American families, and they're affecting the price of everything from coffee to clothes to cameras to furniture. A team of Harvard economists have been tracking retail prices using real-time barcode data. So one thing I want to show is just look at this chart that we are presenting here, tariffs, rising prices for Americans. With January 2024 retail prices as a benchmark, you can see that during 2024, retail prices were trending down on both domestic goods and imported goods. These two lines here. These two lines on domestic and imported goods were basically trending downward. This upper line, domestic, imported goods. So here we are all the way through 2024. These numbers are going down. But all of a sudden in 2025, and particularly here in April, all of a sudden the numbers for both imported and domestic products start going back up, all the way to where we are today. So 2024, policies of the last administration driving prices down, all of a sudden tariff implementation and these policies, prices now going back up. This is when so-called Liberation Day tariffs were announced. Americans started getting squeezed. I don't think they are feeling very liberated. This has been the centerpiece of the president's economic policies, and it remains, in my mind, a broken promise on trying to lower costs. Inflation does remain a consistent problem. American businesses know it, American families know it, and they're being squeezed by it. So I am hopeful the Supreme Court will act soon and help Americans by lowering the prices they're feeling because of the Trump tariffs and the fact that they are being imposed on manufacturers, on households, and consumers that are having an effect on our economy. But I want Congress to act. I hope that as the Supreme Court takes a look at this, that my colleagues will realize that it's their constitutional duty to play a role here and be responsible, similar to what the Cantwell-Grassley Trade Review Act says. That is that we are saying Congress is the dutiful constitutional authority on tariffs, and you have to have all trade policies come before Congress in a transparent and consistent fashion. I hope that my colleagues will respond to this as the Supreme Court acts, and hopefully we will get more attention to the oversight demanded on high costs being impacted by tariffs. We also must work harder to stop inflation and support policies that my colleagues on our side of the aisle have been talking about, how we want to have more affordable housing, how we want to lower the cost on household goods in general, how we want to address energy prices, and how we want Americans to feel like they can keep pace. Yet here we are on one of the biggest crises that we could do something about right now, health care, and we're not doing anything about health care. The expired ACA, the Affordable Care Act tax credit premiums, the common sense solution that we would have had many Americans, millions of Americans still having affordable insurance, our colleagues have not chosen to address this issue. The House passed an extension, a 3-year extension, and yet here we are about to leave for a week, and our colleagues on the House will not even bring that extension up for a vote. 80,000 people in my state are now at risk of losing their health insurance. So I ask our colleagues to do something about this. I see the President released a 1-page health care framework today, and I'm glad he's getting in that. But, Mr. President, today is the end of enrollment. We need more than a 1-page plan. There is a lot of details that go into something that's 18% of U.S. GDP. This is almost 1 in every $5 spent in the American economy. And after 15 years, we've heard nothing really from our Republican colleagues on how they're going to drive down the cost of health care. So my constituents now, looking at these increased inflation numbers, also know that they can't afford to get sick. If they're going to lose this health care, they can't afford the impacts of the economy, and they can't afford the impacts of health care disappearing out from under them. Mr. President, it is time we address inflation on a daily basis here. It is time we really think about what we can do to help the U.S. economy, help Americans keep pace, and help Americans restore the health care that they deserve to have. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Oregon is recognized.
I thank my colleague from Washington State for her fierce advocacy on health care and on so much more in terms of the affordability of living in America. Our families are pressed. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to grant floor privileges to my interns for their shadow days on the following dates: Wes Basket on January 28th, Justine Wendt on February 4th, Shireen Kahl on February 11th, Inez Nieves on February 25th, Maria Abrozovitz on March 4th, Finnegan Hecox on March 11th, Grace Davenport on March 18th, Kylie Huffman on March 25th, Xenia Ellis on April 15th, Anushka Pandey on April 22nd, Violet Sheehan on April 29th, Zach Marchetti on May 14th, Zach Shulik on May 20th, and Joseph Novak on June 3rd, as well as my fellows, Mary Treechuk and Robin Watson-Mosier for the rest of the year.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are considering a trio of appropriation bills, and one of those is the appropriation bill or spending bill for Interior, Environment, and related agencies. I believe that this Interior bill for fiscal year 2026 is an important step toward Congress reclaiming its constitutional power of the purse. The bill protects funding for public lands, including national parks, wildlife refuges, conservation lands, and national forests. President Trump's proposed budget slashed $1 billion from the National Park Service and created the opportunity to transfer or sell off our national park treasures. This bill rejects that vision. It has a better plan: full staffing capacity for our national parks, full complement of seasonal staff, state and tribal historic preservation offices funded, and needed park maintenance and repairs funded. President Trump proposed massive cuts to the U.S. Forest Service, which would be devastating, $1.4 billion in cuts. Those of us who live in the West, who have significant amounts of federal force, know how much investment it takes to appropriately manage these lands. So this bill presents a better plan. It funds the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. It preserves state forestry grants and programs for research and forest health management. It invests in hazardous fuels reduction projects and wildfire preparedness and suppression efforts. It ensures that federal wildlife firefighters are fully paid. The bill funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund at $900 million instead of a much smaller amount proposed by the President. And this bill requires that all projects get funded, not simply projects that the President favors. The bill fully funds payment in lieu of taxes, normally known as PILT, to ensure counties across the country, especially rural communities, have resources they need. The bill upholds our commitment and treaty obligations to tribes. It rejects President Trump's attempt to slash $1 billion from tribal programs. It boosts funding for the Indian Health Service. It provides resources to staff newly opened hospitals and clinics. And it preserves the Indian Health Service's advance appropriation for fiscal year 2027 to ensure that if there is a government shutdown, health care through the Indian Health Service will not shut down. That's protection for 2.5 million people across Indian country. President Trump proposed gutting the Environmental Protection Agency. This bill has a better plan. It provides almost $5 billion above his budget. It protects the Energy Star program, the water and wastewater state revolving funds, so important to so many communities across the land, and the WIFIA program, the Water Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act, that provides low-cost loans for large water projects across the country that would otherwise be unaffordable. It preserves programs for air quality management and pollution control. And the bill includes more than $1.7 billion for community-initiated projects. Now, these are projects where communities said, here's our top priority, and senators then advocated, and House members advocated, that those projects be included in this budget. That is a powerful vision of a local understanding of the best and the most important need being addressed through this bill. Often that involves replacing wastewater treatment plants or restoring critical watersheds. This bill, in addition to these programs, takes another critical step forward. When programs are included in an appropriation bill, the details of how Congress intends for those funds to be spent are traditionally laid out in report language. Now, the report language doesn't have the force of law, but in the understanding of the separation of powers, the administrations of the past respected and operated according to that report language. Every single former presidential administration has honored those directives, but not the Trump administration. And that's why we have included 140 new line items in legislative text, moving items that used to be in report language into the actual language of the law. You know, it's a challenge. It's a challenge if the administration does not respect the visions laid out through the language of our spending bills. How can members of Congress negotiate a compromise that includes priorities of different senators from different parts of the country, different House members from all over the country, if a president's going to say, well, you know what? I've decided I'm simply not going to act on some of those projects. Maybe I'll only implement the projects for red states and not blue states. Or maybe a different president might say, I'll do the projects for blue states but not red states. Or senators I like rather than senators I don't like. No, that is unacceptable. Every time you hear the phrase of the administration saying, a cabinet member or the president himself, we're going to cut programs that don't align with the administration's priorities, that is an authoritarian, strongman state comment that breaks the law and guts the Constitution. That is the administration stealing the power of the purse. The founders deliberately placed the power of the purse, the spending power, with Congress. You can read it in Article 1 of the Constitution. Because it is therefore the people's representatives who decide the design of the programs and how much money they will receive. If just the chief executive makes those decisions, then we don't have a president, we have a king. We have a tyrant. And we, here in Congress, have failed our responsibility to defend the Constitution. Yes, that Constitution, the one we took an oath to defend. It is the vision of a democratic republic that we come together from all over the country, from different walks of life, and work together to forge spending bills and authorizing bills that serve interests across this nation. In a continuing resolution last year, Congress abdicated that responsibility. We failed in defending the Constitution and effectively handed the president a blank check. And that's exactly what Trump wanted this year. Another blank check to operate as a tyrant instead of a constitutional president. But he's not getting it. We have protections in these spending bills that take a significant stride towards defense of our constitutional responsibility and the power of the purse. Now, it is not as strong a language as I would have liked. And yes, there is vulnerability to slow walking or freezing or transferring, but we've taken a strong step in the right direction. There's more we need to do in that, more than we ever thought we had to do, but it's going to take the majority and minority parties working together to fully restore our responsibility under the Constitution. A huge thank you to the chair of the committee, the subcommittee, Senator Murkowski. She is a great partner to work with. We come from different sides of the aisle, but we both come from states full of BLM lands, Bureau of Land Management lands, that is, full of forests, full of challenges that are addressed in this bill. We both care a great deal about the environment that we have the responsibility to defend now and hand to the next generation in healthy condition. The bill that we worked on together here in the Senate, it passed the Senate committee 26-2. That says a lot. To summarize, the bill before us today rejects the president's disastrous cuts. It defends our public lands and our tribal programs and our environment. It keeps out new poison pill writers, and there were a lot of them in the House version of this bill. Together, let's proceed to do more of this kind of bipartisan work and to enable the responsibilities invested in Congress to be fulfilled in responsibility to our constituents across the nation and the structure of our democratic republic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today as the new senator from the state of Michigan, and in particular to recognize the 10-year anniversary of the declaration of emergency for the city of Flint, Michigan, 10 years on. In April of 2014, the city of Flint decided to switch the city's water source from Lake Huron to the Flint River. It was a decision made by state officials to save money at the time, but neither the city nor the state made sure to treat the new water before it came into Flint's taps. And because of that, an American city was poisoned. In less than 2 years, 100,000 people were exposed to toxic levels of lead, bacteria, heavy metals like iron, and chemicals known to cause cancer. That includes about 10,000 children. Imagine the big house at U of M packed on a game day, and that's how many people were poisoned. 10 years ago this week, President Barack Obama declared a federal state of emergency in the city of Flint, and that declaration wasn't necessarily the beginning of the crisis, but it was supposed to be the beginning of the end, a turning point where Flint could begin to recover. But let me be clear, the crisis in Flint has not ended. Not in Flint, not in Michigan, and as a Michigander and Flint's senator, not for me. Flint is a community still in pain, still seeking justice, still seeking accountability. And as Flint's newest senator, I wanted to be here on the 10-year anniversary to make sure Michiganders and Americans don't forget what happened. So like I said, let's review the bidding. Flint is an apocalyptic poisoning of an American city. And it should be a warning to all Americans of what happens when there's not accountability. It's a story of government's failure to protect its citizens, and more than that, it's a story of human tragedy, of ordinary people living ordinary lives, people like Brittany Thomas. Brittany lives in Flint. She has 2 children, Jabari and Janaea. Janaea was just a year old when the city of Flint switched their water from the Flint River. Jabari was 4. Around her, Brittany's neighbors began seeing foam coming out of their taps. Their water was yellow or brown or rust-colored. It smelled metallic. Visible particles were floating around in the water. Soon, Brittany and her children started developing unexplained rashes. Janaea's soft baby skin was streaked with red, riddled with bumps. Concerned, Brittany, of course, reached out to her pediatrician. Then her children started having seizures. For months, they were in and out of the hospital. Brittany didn't know why. She could only watch in panic as her kids grew sicker. To the parents watching this, imagine your 1-year-old baby, this tiny, helpless life that you're supposed to protect, seizing again and again, and you have no idea what's going on. There are no words to describe that terror. Being in and out of the hospital had other consequences. Brittany lost multiple jobs. She began struggling with her bills. She was forced to borrow money from loved ones, and the effects of these unexplainable illnesses seeped into every aspect of their lives. For the rest of 2014, more and more families in Flint began to experience sudden, strange symptoms: thinning hair, rashes, seizures, pain, and chronic conditions. Kids began developing speech impediments, seemingly out of nowhere. Students consistently getting A's and B's were suddenly having a hard time being able to read or think clearly. Their grades slipped. Some developed learning disabilities. Many kids started showing changes in their behavior, where once they were calm, sweet, and curious, they became extremely anxious, emotional, and aggressive. Their parents have no idea why. There was no visible reasons, no obvious explanation. Water, even when it's poisoned, leaves very few visible scars. It wasn't until doctors ran blood tests that Brittany discovered her children had lead poisoning. Families across the city started to get the same diagnosis. But that wasn't enough of an explanation. Brittany knew it. So did other parents. And they suspected there was a link between their kids getting sick and the brown water coming out of their taps. So they began demanding answers. They raised issues with the city council, with county leadership, with state officials. Every time they got the same response: our tests are showing that the water is just fine. Others waved off the signs. Flint is a poor city. Its residents are mostly African American. It was way too easy for leaders to just shrug and look away. Sometimes people actually laughed. Some parents were spending days at a time in the hospital. They were living a nightmare, and they were asking their leaders for help. And instead of getting answers and support, they were dismissed. Brittany and other parents, including Melissa Mays and Leanne Waters, wondered if the city's tests were actually accurate. They decided to test the water for themselves. So in January of 2015, they got boxes of test kits and instructions from a lab supervisor from Flint's water treatment plant. They paid for it with Melissa's tax refund. The accepted limit on lead for drinking water is 15 parts per billion. One home, the home of Leanne Walters, showed a test reading 104 parts per billion. Leanne tested her water again a few weeks later. This time it jumped to 400 parts per billion. And the water her kids were drinking, bathing in, brushing their teeth in, contained more than 25 times the amount of lead that is safe for children. Terrified and frustrated, she called the EPA to complain. She reached a researcher named Miguel Del Toro, who began investigating. Over the next few weeks, Miguel asked Michigan's Department of Environmental Quality over and over again whether Flint's water had been treated properly. First, they said it had been treated. Then they admitted it hadn't. Miguel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Flint was an older city, which meant their plumbing was mostly lead pipes. In his field, it was common knowledge that corrosion control was needed to prevent exactly this type of crisis. Brittany, Melissa, and other parents organized marches and protests almost every week. In July, over 500 people marched 70 miles from Detroit to Flint. Everyone from local media to international press to Hollywood directors started paying more attention. And yet, when Michigan outlets reached out to the state's environmental department, their spokesman said the following: anyone who is concerned about lead in the drinking water in Flint can relax. Doctors, like Dr. Mona Hanna, a pediatrician, compared the results to her own patients' records from the last 2 years. The results matched exactly. Flint was being poisoned by its own drinking water. Dr. Mona and other doctors teamed up with parents to shine a light on these results, and they talked to anyone who would listen. It's an important lesson in banging pots and pans until you get the help you need. But it took almost 2 full years of advocacy and fight from Flint's parents for their kids to get this declaration of an emergency. During those 2 years and beyond, the scale of the government's deception started coming out. Detroit press reported that the city had known about the risk to the water before they even switched the source. A city report back in 2011 had identified the Flint River as corrosive, in need of special chemicals. Both city and state officials reported that as early as 2013, a year before the city water switched. But Michigan's own state environmental department had been doing exactly what they accused others of doing, manipulating data. They had changed city reports to make the lead levels look within acceptable levels. The state's tests, which they had cited for months to discredit the Flint parents, were revealed to have been cherry-picked. Meanwhile, federal reports of lead in Flint's water had been buried by senior officials at the Environmental Protection Agency until Miguel, that one researcher we spoke about, risked his job and leaked the reports to